you can get the workday down to 4.5 hours instead of 8 per day, and you can get it down to a 4-day work week just by fixing a lot of the things that are messed up today. So, and that's what's happening today with this thing that's creeped up called content shock. So people have so much choice for content, and they're getting so much content pushed at them that only the best, most useful, the most attractive content rises to the top that people will actually use or benefit from. Contented cows give better milk. And what it means was they studied these cows, and the cows were cared for. They had a comfortable place to sleep. They were well fed. They had all the kind of things that a cow would like. Produced a higher amount of milk and a better quality of milk. Now, I'm not saying humans are cows, but I mean, we got to think about that same simple premise for human beings. About 45% of CEOs said that their companies are not going to survive in the next decade without significant reinvention.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook, where we explore strategies and innovations shaping the future of work and technology, of course. Today, we're joined by Brent Kedzierski, an award-winning expert in organizational psychology and workplace transformation who led global learning initiatives at Shell and has helped workforce strategies across high-risk industries all over the world. We'll be diving into human-centric work design, eliminating inefficiencies, and the future of work, what it actually looks like. Brent, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here with you today, sharing part of our day together.
Let's go. So let's just jump right in, right? How did you get into this world, and what does human-centric work design actually mean in today's workforce?
Good question to start. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, an industrial city, as everybody knows. Now it's it was the formation of the steel industry. The big industries were coal, steel, railroad. And all my family members were from that genre. A lot of pictures of my grandfathers and grandmothers in steel mills or factories. And I did a lot of that kind of work going through high school and through college. And I was always fascinated by why some people loved their work, why some people hated their work, why some people were really good performers, why some people were really bad performers, and what was management's role and where did the worker fit within the whole ecosystem of work. So I went to university, did my industrial psych learning, training, development, those kinds of things. Ended up in DC working for the world's largest behavioral science company.
Wow.
And we did everything about human performance. We did, aviation, nuclear, the federal government, Department of Defense, anything where there was a study needed to understand why and how people performed, or how to get them to perform better, to either do two things: to stop doing what they shouldn't be doing and to do what they should be doing. So that really started my whole ride. Then I worked a quarter century in Shell as their veteran strategist in terms of people strategy and global transformational change. This was in the beginning of the 2000s when all these big multinationals are trying to go global. So again, it was how do you take a workforce that's now a global workforce and harmonize it across the countries and across thinking styles to kind of produce a great company.
Nice. So what is human-centric work design?
So if you think about human work design, it's an engineering field where it basically starts about it puts this human in the center of design thinking.
Okay.
So, we start with like descriptive analytics, what's describing what's going on with humans. Then we have diagnostic kind of analytics to say, well, if we were looking into the system, our crystal ball, how do we diagnose what's going on? Do we have the infrastructure to do that? And then we move up to things like, predictive analytics. So can we actually, based on trends and data, and especially with this era of AI and technology, can we start to predict what humans will do given a scenario or a situation or a stress level? Now, the thing that we're really getting into now is what we call prescriptive analytics. So, can we actually use AI and chatbots and all the other cyber physical technologies of Industry 4 to work together to start to prescribe for people and kind of cobot with them to say, we've got humans working with themselves, we got humans working with other humans, and we got humans working in partnership with automation technology. And that's the kind of the big Venn diagram that we're really trying to lean into now as a work industry, a work society.
There's a gentleman, David Yang. I was at his house for a fundraiser a few months ago. He's big in robotics and AI. He said within the next 5 years, we'll be not just working with AI. We'll be potentially working along a actual robot. Right? We
Right.
might be cooking with them. We might be using them to go carry things and bring things. I mean, you already see it in restaurants where food can now be delivered by a little robot, but we're pretty close to that.
Right. Well, you're seeing that. My son was in Ireland for 6 months doing a short-term assignment, and again, he had a smart home. Now, 30 years ago we didn't have smart homes, but he's a great ocean divided away, and he's managing his thermostat, he's managing his water, he's managing his lights, all remotely. And that's smart. That's what we're trying to get to. So we're doing more and more of this every day. And the humans are expecting this because they're seeing what's happening in their personal lives as far as automation and technology arrangement go, and they want to basically go through their office doors and have that same level that's in mainstream society. They want to have that in work as well. You're a technology expert, so you know all about this with the law of acceleration with technology and all those kinds of things.
Absolutely. How does intensity and density differ from traditional time-based metrics?
Well, if you look at a lot of the work that we're doing today, I have done a lot of studying on the variables that really impact work design and the anatomy of work. And what you want is you want an intense and dense work structure, an ecosystem. But what's happening, if you look at three things in the world of work, there's a worker preparedness and readiness. Now, we know that we can probably harness a 30%, 25% gain just by making workers better prepared and ready. There's a second area that you look at work. It's worker autonomy and engagement. It's how much do they own the work? How much autonomy and kind of span do they have in making decisions, solving problems, doing those kind of things? And that's another 30%. And then, work design and process efficiency, which again, you can get up to another 30 to 50% improvement. Now, the interesting thing about this whole concept of work density and intensity, there's a variety of things that play into this. Like, for example, unnecessary meetings. Okay, that's one thing that goes on with work. Ineffective communication, streamlining processes, the culture, the tools and technology that are available. Now, when you look at the research studies, they'll say, well, technology and tools can have up to 25% improvement in work productivity. And training and development, if done well, can have another 22%. So there's a whole list of probably about 15 major things, everything from, again, increased autonomy, elimination of interruptions every 7 minutes, increased flow time for people to actually think. That could really, and they say it could basically increase work productivity by up to like 350%.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you looked at it that way, you could say, well, wait, we could get the 5 day, 40-hour work week down to 1.5 hours for 1.5 days. But that's not really realistic because that's really a kind of a theoretical basis. But if you do look at all those things, you can get the workday down if you were to improve them significantly without overlap and duplicate kind of reductions and things like that. You can get the workday down to 4.5 hours instead of 8 per day, and you can get it down to a 4 day work week just by fixing a lot of the things that are messed up today. So if you think about intensity of work, it is how intense are you in focusing on the task at hand. And then does that also allow you to be denser in how deeper you go in
Yes.
all the things associated with doing that task well? Now, you said it earlier, with this new realm of technology, work is going to go to be higher level cognitive work. So it's going to require deeper and more critical thinking skills. It's going to require more creative skills. And
Yes.
that's creative in working now with this big data that you're now going to have, because all this data is going to be curated and rendered for you and sorted, and you're going to be able to do all kind of different BI, business intelligence kind of things with it that
Yeah.
you could never do before, because our parents spent most of their time looking for data, then trying to figure out if it was accurate or quality or relevant. And they spent all their day on, they were doing the curation, they were doing the rendering, they were doing the filtering. So, I mean, again, you're finding that, just think how much more intense your mind can work with higher level sense making. So, you're getting more insights through the data, more analytics given to you. So your big brain can do a lot more with it. So that's much more intense. And then what that does is that opens the door to have it be much more dense in terms of use your cognitive skills, creative thinking, critical thinking, then collaborate with more humans, because the workplace is no longer siloed and one dimensional. It's matrixed, where you have now integrated supply chains, and you have departments that are now sharing data, and you have equipment that's sharing data. So instead of having linear kind of evolution of work, you're having exponential
Yes.
evolution, where it's coming from all directions, north, south, east, west. So the work becomes denser in terms of what you can put into it
Hmm.
and what you can take out of it. Okay, so you think about, if you had you go buy Wonder Bread at the store, it's pretty soft and squishy. But then you go to a nice bakery and you get a big hard Italian or a rye bread or a pumpernickel bread. That's what work is becoming more like today.
It feels like there's a lot less busy work happening because of the AI can produce, like you said, so much data for you, so much things you can get insights from, that now it's just more about thinking. And what you described, Brent, reminds me of two things. One, I think you and I talked about this, is when you're about to go on vacation, right? And you have from 8 to 12 just to get everything done and leave. How much work do you get that day? Right? Like those 4 hours are so dense and so intense and so focused that you get more work done in those 4 hours sometimes than 3, 4, 5 days, full days, because there's no time to fool around. There's no time to get interrupted. There's no ability to take a break. It's just focused 4 hours. That's reminds me of one topic. I think you would probably agree with that. And then two, when I describe when people want to work at HireCloud and they say like, what do the work hours look like? Work-life balance, blah blah blah. I kind of throw that out the window. I said, look, we work a typical 8, 9, 10 hour days. Okay, 10 is like really rare. We're working 8, 9 hours, but don't get it twisted. Those 8 hours are extremely dense. Now I have the vocabulary to describe it, Brad, because it's 8 hours of focused, deep work a lot of times, a lot of meetings. Unfortunately, too many meetings, I would agree with, but there's no time to fool around versus a 10, 12 hour day somewhere else where you might accomplish very little, right? So
Right.
we're really dense and focused.
Right.
Now, ideally, we want to clear that up and allow less meetings, more flow state, which I actually want to get into next, but at least I can give vocabulary to what the days look like, you know?
Right. I oftentimes think about this. I was a wrestler earlier in my life, and you can have a wrestling match where it's not so dense, because you might have a lot of interruption. So something's wrong with the mat and the ref stops it and you have to
Yeah.
stand there and wait. Maybe somebody's red or green tag on their foot is falling off. Maybe somebody's shoe keeps getting untied. So the match isn't very dense in terms of like just 100% it's
Yeah.
on, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. That's the kind of density of it. And then the intensity of it, just think about two wrestlers that are basic wrestlers. They each have like 5 or 6 skills. So when they have a match, their intensity of that match isn't going to be too intense because
Yeah.
they've only got a couple moves. But then you take someone that's both world class athletes, and they're going to have moves and counter moves
Yeah.
all over the place. So the intensity of that match will be spectacular. And that's like, for example, like in the NWCA wrestling tournaments, they call it the blood round, that last championship round. And those matches, everybody wants to go and see those. And they
Yeah.
have the, highest ticket prices because typically they're very intense
Yes.
because of the expertise each player, has. And they're also very dense because, they prepped the work area, the mat, and
Hmm.
the environment so well that they don't have those kind of things. So again, it's this leakage that we talk about. And I think to your point, we asked your listeners, how many people actually try to go to work early when nobody else is there because they say that's when I get all my work done.
Very often. I mean, I love those days. Anytime I can come in at 8, usually I'm the last one to come in due to, gym schedule and all. But when I get in here, when I'm alone, man, I get so much done before 9 a.m.
And again, my best days sometimes are like Saturday. I'll be, doing my creative writing or something, and while I'm doing it, while maybe I'm watching a football game or doing something else. But I love to work when somebody can work on their terms, when their brain's creative, or when they're allowed to do that. And that's what these organizations need to do. They need to free up the flexibility of their ecosystems to allow people to kind of work when they're intense and they can work when it's dense. Because again, the stats are people get interrupted every 7 minutes. They have to correct information every 15 minutes, and that doesn't let work be dense. If we get rid of all the junk that interrupts us and interferes, we're denser. If we get more technology to work with us, we can be much more intense than just working within our own brain capacity.
Brent, tell us what flow state actually is, and kind of what's its role in improving productivity.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of books written on flow and work. And, everybody wants flow. And that's why you've seen like a lot of these creative artists, the painters, the songwriters, they want to be in a place that kind of shuts them off from the world. You'll hear the writer go to a cabin in the woods, or a painter might go sit by the seashore because they can be in their own head, in their own space without the interruptions of the world. And when they do that, they start to get into their work. I mean, my best days, and I'll tell you this, my best writing comes when I start maybe writing at 7 o'clock and I haven't done anything, but when I finally look at the clock, it's like 1:30 in the morning. I've lost all sense of time and space because I'm so focused and so entrenched in what I'm thinking about and doing. And I'm in it. We've got all these statistics available to us, and companies aren't using them. Like employees that get regular feedback, they're like almost 90% more likely to be engaged. People that get clear information on what's expected of them, they're twice as likely to be engaged. The people with clear performance expectations, they're 50% more likely to achieve the desired goal. But when you ask workers, do you get all those things? Most of them will say, no, I don't get clear expectations. I get interrupted. I don't get any feedback. So what do you think their flow density is? It's not high because their environment isn't supporting this new age of cognitive, creative critical thinking. It's not helping them be creative because it's interrupting them. And there's so many statistics about once you get interrupted, it takes you so much more time to get back to where you were. So all those kind of things. I mean, the U.S., just like the economy, for example, loses like 3 trillion a year,
Wow.
just in things like bad, poor quality data, because it interrupts people because they got to stop and then they got to debate it, and then they have to reverse track because they've got to undo or redo the work that they did, so it impacts productivity. And there's not enough companies, not enough people that are studying how these new technologies and how these new benefits that we're getting can actually, if not controlled or monitored well, can actually exponentially decrease productivity. So the person might get a heck of a lot more data at their fingertips, but if it becomes overwhelming, you have content shock, people are going to kind of get lost and get frustrated.
Yeah.
So, again, a lot of those kind of things and the big thing now is, we talk about these power skills, like I said, problem solving. They say now, if you are a good problem solver, because a lot of people ask me about, what's the shift in hiring practices? We used to look at people's big resumes and, all this kind of stuff to hire people. Did they look good on paper? But now a lot of companies say, well, or do they have the right aptitude? Because I can always train them on rote content and things like that. But are they actually a good problem solver? Again, statistics will tell you that people that are viewed as good problem solvers are 30+% more likely to be promoted. So if I would tell my son, hey, if you want to be on the fast track with your company, learn how to be a really good problem solver.
It's huge. Problem solving is everything. It's one of the things we talk about during the interview process, on onboarding when someone starts. We're like, look, this place, I'm glad you're excited. Yes, we're a terrific place. We think, to work here, and awards say so too, but we've got problems too. And I want you to learn to solve problems. And most young folks have never learned to solve problems, right? They run from problems. So this is incredibly important. I agree with you,
Right.
as a part of success. Now, the statistic I've heard, Brent, is that it takes approximately 20 minutes after you've been interrupted to go back to where you were. And you just told me seconds ago or minutes ago that every 7 minutes someone's interrupted. So just think about that. You get interrupted every 7 minutes, and it takes you 20 minutes to get back to flow. No wonder we've lost 3 trillion a year in productivity. No wonder companies can't grow because of just that. I'm actually a victim to this, right? I have a very open door policy, and that's one issue. And two, so I get interrupted all the time. And two, I mean, emails, right? Slack,
Right.
WhatsApp, text message, email. It all just is coming in from 15 different avenues. And my way of dealing with it is there's so much coming at me as either I shut down and don't talk to anybody, or I answer immediately so I don't have to worry about getting back to that person. But I find myself having issues. What are some common inefficiencies in the workplace that hinder this productivity? I mean, I just named one.
Right.
What others are there?
Well, if you think about like basic work before, when people really, they had, think about Frederick Taylor in 1910, and he did the scientific management, and to get the right shovel for the job. And if you have a better shovel to shovel coal, that's great. If you have a better shovel to shovel hay, that's great, and the worker can, make much better use of that. And I remember years ago, I used to work with the military in aviation on the heads up display. And it was becoming a time when, for example, the F-18 was getting so complex for pilots and the navigators that, because you had the silic, which is like kind of the gear shift that's got all the buttons on it. Then you've got the heads up display, and they were getting so much sensory information that, there was a point when it was negative, because they can't, the cognitive load was too much. And that's what's happening today with this thing that's creeped up called content shock. So people have so much choice for content, and they're getting so much content pushed at them that only the best, most useful, the most attractive content rises to the top that people will actually use or benefit from. So this goes into this thing called cognitive load, where the complexity of expectations and their impact on the person's brain power. But this also goes in these other things like, cognitive, what we call scalability. So it's the ability, years ago, the big thing in companies was, well, you have to have the skill to deal with ambiguity and change. That's really, very 2010-ish. But now the new skill is cognitive flexibility, especially with somebody like you who promotes technology, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and changing information and learn new skills and be creative in thinking and collaborative in problem solving. So we're moving an era where the things like the emotional intelligence that was great in 2010 and it's still good today, but because of the evolution of technology and societal changes and worker expectations of how like Gen Z wants to work,
Yeah.
there's becoming emergent levels and higher levels of these kind of skills.
So dealing with ever changing things is the new kind of EQ in this case, right?
Right. Yeah. Think about it. The big thing was company. We used this term years ago called change fatigue. Everybody in their company was fatigued of reorganizations. They were fatigued of new initiatives. They were fatigued of being pulled off one task and changing priorities and put on another. Well, they got to be more resilient. They got to deal with ambiguity. That was kind of the emergent era. People know that the change cycle now, and they're more accustomed to it. They don't think reorganizations are such a big deal, and they kind of expect them every 2 or 3 years, even though companies shouldn't be doing them every 2 years. But that's all right. That's another thing. And so they need these higher level skills in order to survive in this new work economy with, again, big data, cyber physical connectivity, extended tribes that I call them of work groups they have to interact with and things like that.
Brent, you talked about work. What is it and why is it such a big problem?
Well, there's a group, Asani, that does a lot of research on the anatomy of work, and they reported a year or two ago that 60% of all work. So think about it, 60% of your 40-hour work week is about work. It's about doing the work. It's about someone explaining to you what they want to have done or achieve. Then it's about having a meeting about, well, who's going to be involved, how are we going to do this, when do we have to have it done, and then it's about having more meetings to say, well, we just started it and we ran into this, so let's talk about this. So it's not somebody saying, hey, give me the flag or the baton. I'm going to run my 100 yards and pass it off to somebody else. It is like you're almost like in a amusement park ride where everybody's spinning the wheel and it's spinning around as it's going down the track.
You're
Um,
talking about work versus working. It sounds like out of those 40 hours, only 16 hours is perhaps on the execution of the work, right?
Right. Yeah, and again, if you go to my earlier thing when I broke it down in those three key areas about preparedness and readiness and autonomy and engagement and work design and environment, each one of those basically it's agreed throughout the literature that each one of those can impact the productivity of work 30%, 25, 30%. Well, if you add all three of those up, that's 90% right there. So that's almost 100% of work that is slack.
So we know why it's a problem, right? Because again, only 40% is focused on execution of the work. So what do we do about it, right? How do we reduce these unnecessary things and these inefficient processes to be more efficient?
Yeah, so this comes in again, goes back full circle to our conversation. This is about the human-centric design system. So and again, what I would say is like I would take a work day, and I would tell companies, look, start to make your workers' days a little bit more structured. So maybe from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, you allow your people in your company to do deep focus, cognitive, problem solving, strategic work, and nobody sends emails. You can't send an email in this company until 10:01.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we say, you know what? What we're going to do now is from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. This is the only time in this company where we can be collaborative. We're having lunches, we're having lunch and learns, we're having meetings, we're doing team things, and that's when people get together in this company, and everybody knows that's the time. And then we've got maybe an hour, 1 to 2, where people get a personal time to recharge, do their own thing. Maybe they're going to do some private learning, a little developmental growth. It's just their time. And then they go back, it's from 2 to 3, maybe that they're back to, creative work with people, or they're in little innovation cubes with other people. And they're saying, look, we're not focusing on anything else. We're not focusing on big thinking. We're focusing on being creative. We're brainstorming. We're doing a deep dive. We're just thinking about creativity. All the other stuff is off our plate for this 2 hour period, hour period.
Got it.
And then they can have the last hour, half hour, whatever, just to have reflection. I just think if an entire company had their day structured like that, how much more efficient it would just be from that regard of time management.
So time blocking is a great opportunity to create structure so that people can get more done in less time, basically.
Yeah, because I mean, again, I study this all the time, and like, when I look at all the things, again, lack of clear performance expectations could degrade performance and productivity by 25 to 35%. Bad tools, bad data, bad information or resources can degrade it by 20 to 30%, and so on. Your insufficient or negative incentives can do it. Skill deficiencies, low motivation to perform. So all these things in this era where, look, jobs are not like they were from Industrial Revolution 1. Remember, Industrial Revolution 1 was started like 1750. And that was when we started to kind of use water and steam power to do the work of typically a guy or a gal on a plow, or a horse pulling a plow. And so there wasn't a whole lot of intensity or density in that. Actually, there probably was, because the person just, tilling in the field, or the wheel is just spinning and grinding corn. But then you had the next layer in the 1800s, where we started to use electricity. So now, instead of water and steam turning things, we could power it up with electricity, and we could have lights. Remember, the creation of lighting created the 24-hour continuous factory. So before, electricity, factories shut down when it got dark. So that opened up a whole new era of work time and shifts and everything like that. And you could also plug more things in. So work could become more complex. You have to be a little bit more thinking. And then you had in the 60s the computer era with automation. You had your auto companies start to do robotics and automation. And then that increased the intelligence of work. And then now today with Industry 4 and this cyber physical connectivity, where I can take a piece of equipment on one end of a plant and connect it to a piece of equipment on the other, part of the plant, take the A data and the B data and make new C data. And so, we've got to keep evolving our humans. And what happens with technology is companies put so much effort and intensity and density on the technology, they don't keep the human at the same pace. And they don't look at escalating and evolving human capacity like they are technical capacity. I mean, just think about the little flash drives and remember the floppy disk and the 3.25-inch disk, and then the zip drive and everything else. Well, we haven't been saying, well, how do we increase a person's capacity to do critical thinking more and more and more? How do we really help them figure out how to be better decision makers with structured decision cycles, and better problem solvers, or sense makers, or situation awareness seekers? Those skills, we're teaching them to computers and technology. Everything
Yes.
I said, we're trying to put into technology. They're trying to be better, accruing data and sorting it and making sense out of it, and problem solving with smart systems and things. But we're not keeping pace with our human beings.
That's a
And
great
that's
point,
one of
bro.
the things, and that's why people fear automation.
Absolutely. I feel like what's happening is companies are aggressively trying to replace their people because people can be challenging and difficult and all that. Or what they're trying to do is they're trying to make them do exactly the same thing, but faster and more of, right? And you're right. We're not focusing too much about how to think differently and do differently, right? To do more with less. I feel like we're just saying just do more of it because I'm automating a bunch of your less intellectual work, basically, right? So you can do more of the intellectual work, which is understandable. But you're right. We're not really changing their mindset. We're not helping them change the way they think and problem solve.
Right. I mean, you know this. I mean, there's the tech trap, the technology trap. It's the potential pitfalls and unintended consequences of rapid technical advancement. So you have to balance all the ethical considerations on society, human well-being. You can't have an over reliance on technology because that creates vulnerabilities. Just think about, cyber attacks or, critical infrastructures like, nuclear plants or other things that had devastating effects if we let them kind of do the industrial thing of the old saying was a man and a dog to run the peopleless plant. So the dog was there to watch that the man didn't do anything, and the man was there just to make sure that the dog automation did what it's supposed to do. So
Oh, interesting.
it's all these kind of things that we've got to think about for the future of AI, automation, work. Because remember, you know, if you look at like the 1850s to, especially the 1950s, people were indoctrinated, especially in the US, to fear technology. If you think about all of our fables in our country,
Yes.
Paul Bunyan with the axe, trying that was a representative of the lumber industry when the workers were fearful that this machinery was going to take the jobs of lumberjacks. You had John Henry, with his hammer. When they thought that the guys that did the railroad tracks and the tunnels were going to be taken over by the steam shovels, the locomotives and things. All these things. There's a fable character in Pittsburgh called Joe Macarack, and he was this big burly guy that could bend steel, and he did all the steel work because they were worried that the technology was coming to do this. So all kind of industrial history and the
Yep.
psychology of what companies and what culture. You had this lady in the Appalachia, Pistol Packin' Molly, who she wrote songs about the working person, about the coal miner, about the effects of work on workers. We had that whole 100+ year period where people were just told stories to fear automation, to fear what it was going to take their jobs away and make them irrelevant. And now we got a lot of repair work to do because people still fear, the technology's coming to replace them.
Well, now, Brent, if you pay attention, most movies about AI are, is someone taking over their home, someone trying to take over their family. There's a lot of that going on, right? That's very similar to what you described. We talked, you and I forget exactly what it was, but it was the fourth turning in the future of work. Tell me a little bit about that. Can you explain this concept of the fourth turning theory and implication of I guess, the workplace evolution?
Yeah, sure. The fourth turning is a concept that's been along for these two guys, Neil Howe and another guy. Unfortunately, he died, and I can't remember his name. But they wrote a book years and years ago, and Neil updated the book a few years ago called The Fourth Turning. And the premise of it is that the world works in like 100-year cycles. So every maybe 80 to 120 years, there's a cycle, and it's a seasonal cycle, meaning that it starts with a spring. There's an awakening, and I always look at the turnings in the U.S. So in 1620 there was an awakening. People landed in the U.S. They started to build colonies, and that went into a summer where things heated up. More people came in. You had the Mayflower. Then you had passenger list and ship list, and the U.S. was growing in terms of population and immigration. And then you had kind of a winter or a fall when it started to get a little bit colder, and they started to have problems. So now you had a lot of disease and a lot of Native American conflicts, and then it heated up where okay, we had this industrial, the American Revolution, where we had the taxes and the British, and it all blew up, and we had a war, and then we got out of the war, we signed a declaration, and there was a new American awakening. We had the Constitution, then and it went again, and then you had started to have Andrew Jackson came in with the Trail of Tears. It started to kind of warm up again, and then you had the climax of the American Civil War. Then you had another war, and then you had to reconstruct the country. You had to rebuild it again. And then it went again. So you had, these cycles. And then you had, the Great Depression. Well, then you had the Roaring Twenties that was like the peak. Remember, everybody was happy. The Roaring Twenties, you had the flappers. But then you had the Great Depression, and then you had World War II, and everything froze again, and it reached its peak, so it kind of blew up again, right? Well, then the war ended. America was a great country because of the productivity from the war effort. Everybody came home. We had the baby boomers. Everybody was making babies. And then we had the 1950s where there were two cars in every garage. And, you had the IBM family man, and you had, the gray suits, and you had all the new toasters and appliances that were coming up. And this was great. And then it kind of, had a little bit of a summer where it really heated up. You had the evolutions of the 60s and 70s where you really got VCRs and the luxury of life. And, but then you had, political upheavals and things. You had the Vietnam War. But then it froze again in 2008 with the Great Recession, where that started what is now what we call this fourth term. And I believe if you look at the elements, and I put the elements, this is my own thing, I put them in what I call a teacup. I used to use this at Shell. It's technology. So is technology hitting a peak, a head? And I think you would say with AI and people saying, well, now AI, we can't use it to be a personal therapist. And, what's the ethical dilemmas and what's the political dilemmas? I think a lot of countries are now having their own AI strategies. And I think the investment in AI is supposed to be like something like 4.1 trillion in the next couple years. I think just in the US, I think. And so you're having all this technology upheaval. Then
Yes.
you're having the political upheaval. So look at Gaza. Look at Ukraine. Now you see Ukraine starting to hit this pinnacle where Trump's come in and said, "Wait a minute, you having this war just to have this war and make money off this war," and now Europe's coming in. So there's the political upheaval. Then you have the commercial upheaval where you said it earlier. People have higher expectations. They want these higher touch, higher concept solutions. So they don't want a linear solution anymore. Look at our automobiles. Our automobiles are doing everything now. They're starting to
Drive themselves.
even drive themselves. That right, they're becoming autonomous. So that's the commercial end of it. And you now with the commercial, you got these supply chains, and people are thinking, wait a minute, does U.S. really have a strong supply chain, or are we too codependent or dependent? So you have technical, economic, commercial, political, and then you have operational. So all these companies that you work with are looking to say, can we go to a people's factory? How far can we push technology? How far can we push automation without having to deal with humans, or do we have to have a resurgence of the human spirit? So you have all these things that are disruptions and upheavals right now. And my prediction is around by 2030, 35, you're going to have where everything has gotten so intense and dense that we're going to have to rethink industries. We're going to have to rethink global, partnerships. You see what's going on in Canada, Mexico, U.S., and
Yeah.
we're going to have to rethink how we manage technology, and we have to rethink how can cyber physical and nuclear and all these things impact our world. So we're hitting this elevated state where we've got to take a serious look at all these things and ask ourselves, what does the new awakening look like? So in 2035, how do we reboot for the next 100 years?
Wow. It's funny that your timeline is very interesting because many have predicted a massive recession where they say it could be a depression right around 1930 to 1935. So that could be the stop you're talking about. Maybe it's like the 80s, maybe it's like 2008, but a lot worse. Maybe it's like the 30s, whenever the Great Depression was. But I feel like the timing makes sense from that because
Right.
there's been research done on this, and a lot of it predicts right around that 1930, 31, 32 time frame.
And what I would tell you, because I think your listeners have a real tech centric focus, that's where your expertise is and why they listen to your show. And what I would say about technology and why we want these human centered design principles is I have an 80-20 rule that I've devised because that's all I do is like work with this, the challenges, tensions, and dilemmas with technology and people and adoption, acceptance, and implementation, utilization. And there's three things that go into technology and the human psyche. And the first thing is what we call it's 80% of the impact. So I can tell you that your success or failure from a human perspective, not from a technical, from a human acceptance of the technology and adoption and utilization of it, are what we call essential drivers that humans have to feel. And that's 80% of the predictive validity of acceptance and adoption, which is the perceived usefulness. So that they see the incoming technology as something that's going to enhance their performance, things like real-time analytics. And then they look at the ease of use of that, which is, the tool's going to be intuitive. Can I actually use them, or are they a bigger hassle than my old way of working, which was maybe a three-ring binder and a pencil? And then is there any relative advantage to that innovation in terms of my personal safety, my performance, my progression, or my or lessening my frustration at work? Because remember, workers probably most of them their number one thing they would raise their hand is that they're typically frustrated at work because of all these problems we've talked about, these um, industrial kind of workplace problems. And the last thing is the technology compatible? Meaning, can they seamlessly integrate it with their existing work practices? That's 80%. And then the other two, which only represent 15% and five, are what we call engagement enhancers. So, did you involve the user in the design and the development? Because that builds their trust and a little bit of ownership into the technology.
Sure.
And then, have you kind of prepared them in terms of, making them feel comfortable and, with training and support so they feel confident and they have some autonomy in it. And the last thing is really the 5%. And this is actually the art of it all. It's the adoption catalyst. So, what are you going to do for your clients to help them adopt your technology that you promote? And that's things like, trialability, which means giving them a pilot and let them build their confidence through kind of hands-on experience.
Sure.
And things like, observability, which is, are there any success stories? Can they see visible, tangible results? Because remember, I always say, it's not a solution until it works.
Yeah.
And this is the problem we have with technology. And again, and I'll go back to an old adage that I've always used. They did studies years ago, and this was way, way back. I look at from my historical studies. The saying was, "Contented cows give better milk." And what it means was they studied these cows, and the cows where they were cared for, they had a comfortable place to sleep, they were well fed, they had all the kind of things that a cow would like, produced a higher amount of milk and a better quality of milk. Now, I'm not saying humans are cows, but I mean, we got to think about that same simple premise for human beings.
Of
If
course.
we treat our people better, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be happier, and they're going to be more, this is the important thing, more sustainable. Because remember, companies are turning over faster and faster than they ever did. I mean, the lifespan of companies has traditionally been going down over the years,
Of course.
just as the tenure rates of employees have been going down.
Absolutely.
And a lot of this is due to the nature of industry and automation, but it's also due to the nature of workers being disengaged
Yeah.
and so easily re-engaged by another greener blade of grass.
Brent, there's actually a funny commercial. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It probably comes from that theory. Happy cows make better milk. It's a California cows are happier cows
Yeah,
supposedly, right? Because there's sun and there's lots of room and all that stuff. So it's funny you bring that up. Brent, I already see the rub, right? I see the rub because HireCloud is a technology consulting and recruiting firm and go to market as well. And one of the things we notice with hundreds of our clients and thousands of our candidates is there's already a gap. There's a frustration, right? Employees want to work fully remote, less hours, higher pay, better benefits. It's natural, I guess. On the flip side, companies want more productivity, right? More collaboration, more FaceTime, more. And so, since there's no answer, I think technology found a very easy way in, right? It found an easy way in where now companies wrongfully are thinking, well, I'm done dealing with people. I'm going to replace people with technology, which is what you're seeing when you hear how far can companies take it? Can we have humanless warehouses and humanless factories and things like that? And so
right,
perhaps the 2030, 2035 timeframe is a restructuring of mindset, right? Because we're
right,
going to push this the next 5 years. I sense it. We're going to push it to, like you said, to the until we can't, and then we
right,
got to say, okay, no, we got to restructure this. So
right.
really
Well,
interesting.
if you think about it, there's a statistic out there, and it said something like they polled CEOs of big Fortune 500. It might even have been like Fortune 100 companies, and the preponderance of them, and I mean the preponderance, I think it was like up to 70 some percent, said that the success of their company in the future depends more on technology than people.
Wow.
Like for a guy like me, it was shocking. And then if you there's another statistic that they about 45% of CEOs said that their companies are not going to survive in the next decade without significant reinvention. So there's 2 points. So now we're saying it's dependent on technology from a CEO perspective. They've got to drastically reinvent themselves. And then another survey had said something about, companies that aren't fit, what they call, they have a future fitness, they won't perform and they'll be outperformed by higher market capitalization growth based companies and things like that. So one of the things I always study is this whole thing about, like, I look at even like the US, and I focus on the US mostly on a lot of my analysis because it's just easier. If you look at immigration and you look at like the number of jobs we have today in the U.S. and the number, the 314 million people that we have, and how we're growing those people, and then if you look at what the projected growth rate for the U.S. is in the next 50 years, there's a number of jobs that we need. But then you look at the trail of automation, that the number of those lower paying jobs that the automation will take, we're going to have a significant gap.
Massive.
And my belief is what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot more jobs that are coming out of the manufacturing, the kind of rote base, movement kind of industries. And you're going to see a big shift to more people doing kind of service related
Yes.
jobs. And just think about it. When I grew up, I did everything manually. I changed my car parts, carburetors, and
Absolutely.
air filters, and tires, and brakes, and I cut my grass,
Yep.
and I could change oil. And now my son, who's a Gen Zer, he never cut grass,
Yep.
never changed the oil filter. So what's he doing? So my grandfather, who if he needed a tool, he would manufacture it himself. He would weld and actually create the tool that he needed.
Mhm.
He wouldn't buy it, he'd make it. Now, my son, anytime he needs something done, he's going to hire somebody that's an expert, electrician, a plumber, a carpenter, to come in and do it. So I think you're going to see a big increase in those types of jobs because of the societal demand for them and because that's the way the world is shaping. And it's naturally doing that because we're always going to a higher concept, higher touch, a more elevated station of life for
Sure.
people. I mean, that's what progress is. Instead of baking your own bread, you can buy it. Well, now instead of buying it, now it gets delivered to you.
Yeah.
So you just in that little short statement, you've seen three evolutions of bread.
Absolutely. Brent, it's funny you said that because you missed one really important factor. Those things you talked about, the service, the plumbing, the roofing, the electricians, you can't AI that easily. The complexity to AI that is too far out in the future. So those folks are the most safe in the next 20, 30 years. It's scary to imagine, but I do imagine a time where 80% of folks will be unemployed of some sort because really there won't be a need for what they do. I was lecturing my son doing the old, I used to walk 20 miles in the snow,
Yeah.
bit with him. He's 12, and I'm like, at 12 years old, I used to cut my dad's lawn and I used to change his oil and his brakes. He's like, Pops, your car's electric. There's no oil. Folks that cut our grass and they blow and all that stuff. I'm like, yes, but you could be doing this or something else as a service for your family.
And I'll tell you one thing to build on that point is one of the most satisfying jobs, at least in the U.S. today, are construction workers. And they say they're happiest. Now, there's a lot of safety incidents with
Yes.
construction workers. That's one of the worst safety incident jobs. But one of the happiest and contented because they're outside,
Yes.
they're being creative,
Using their
and
hands.
they're working with other people in a team
Yes.
towards a common purpose and goal that's clear.
And they could see their work happening, right?
Right.
They could see their work happening. They see the framing, they see the electrical, they see the roof coming on. You're absolutely right. In technology, a lot of times why people leave their jobs at amazing companies like Salesforce and Meta and Google, because you're wondering, why would you leave this job when you don't have to? And the number one thing they say is if you were an artist or a musician, how would you feel if your music or your art or your poems never hit, it never went to the public? I never thought about it that way. I said, oh, wow. That's what they said their work is. They say 95% of the work that we do actually never sees day of life. It never goes into production where it's actually used. So what am I doing? Yes, I'm being paid very well. Yes, I get catered lunch every day. Yes, I have incredible benefits. Yes, I probably earn 5 times more than an average person, but my work doesn't matter. So the construction example was actually really good because I build homes on the side, and I can see every time I show up every Monday to take a walk, I'm like, wow, look at all this work being done. And the people do seem relatively happy.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things that again, I always say the human condition is four things. Humans are fallible. We're not perfect because we're in a perpetual state of self-actualization, growth, existentialism, whatever you want to call it. But we're adaptable, so we can look in the mirror and we can see ourselves and say, I need to change or I need to do better, and I can do better because I've got human capacity.
Yep.
And then they're social. They want to have a mirror against the world. They want to see how they're doing. And the last thing is they want some kind of purpose and they seek purpose. And I
Yes.
think if you talk to anybody's life arc, their drama, they can tell their life story and hey, what did you fail in life? What did you achieve in life? How did you overcome? What's your story, your hero story? What was your social aspect of your life all about? And what did you find most purposeful in your life?
That's awesome. Brent, this has been amazing. How do people find you and connect with you?
Well, the easiest way is they can go to LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn supporter. I like to have a big, nice community on LinkedIn. They can also go to the Hexagon website, the Hexagon ALI website that I think you can have in your show notes. And I've got a lot of articles and blogs and things on these kind of topics. And you'll see that I don't talk a lot about Hexagon as a company on this because my spirit, my purpose is about helping them take a hard, truthful look at their technologies in the mirror and challenging them to say, are these technologies human-centric? Will people be able to see that 80-20, the essential drivers down to the catalyst, the adoption catalyst? And are they effective in that regard? And are you, in your pipeline, are you understanding what these cyber physical and what these technology solutions today are going to mean in the future? Because what I try to promote to them is, in life, we have this thing called the experience debt gap. And it's the idea that humans are very much inclined to trade this hard choice solution of tomorrow. I'll make a hard choice tomorrow for an easier choice solution today. And my best example is health and wellness. People are apt to have fast food and avoid exercise because it's just a hassle to eat healthy, and it's not fun to eat healthy, and I'd rather watch TV and rather than go to the gym. But that's going to lead to long-term health issues.
Absolutely.
But investing in a healthy lifestyle requires effort, but it pays off in better health, wellness, and longevity. Same thing with these companies, that it's not just about digital transformation and trying to make your investments pay off for today, but are you building this ecosystem that's scalable and setting the stage for your next 5 steps down the road?
Brilliant.
And I don't think that they will take the easier decision from a technology perspective today than, and say, well, we'll just deal with it and let the next generation deal with it, or let somebody else deal with it. So that's the thing I always worry about with the technology and the people.
Play chess, not checkers, y'all.
That's right.
Brent, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. We've learned a ton. Let's stay connected.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Take care. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.